and we'll get started whenever you all are ready.
I think we're ready. I'm going to go ahead and cut off my webcam. This typically is your show, so we'll see your face or you share your cam and we'll go from there.
All right. Are
Yeah,
you all able to see the camera or just the screen?
yeah, I'm fine with just a PowerPoint.
Okay, that's fine. That works for me too.
I don't know how to turn my camera off, but it's wait, let's see. Am I okay? All right. So heterogeneous interactions among black college men attending HBCUs is somewhat pretty much the title that I'm going with, or somewhere along those lines. The reason and logic for this is that in the United States, a lot of theories say that prejudice and stereotypes are ubiquitous, they're widespread, and they really sustain in all aspects of psychology, sociology, and education. Moreover, they are the greatest determinant of inequalities within the country. So, based on that, one of the common misconceptions is that black males are really monolithic and we unequivocally, or they, let me say they, share similar experiences and backgrounds. It just says that all black men are the same. So I just wanted to go a little bit deeper to unearth that and really show that black men are different in different spaces. HBCUs were founded. They make up 3% of the universities within the United States. They were founded in response to provide opportunities to black students who weren't afforded those same opportunities at predominantly white institutions. With that, um, Brown versus Board of Education, a couple of civil rights acts occurred. A lot of desegregation occurred with schooling, and predominantly white institutions enrolled black students. Prior to that, and during that time, as increases occurred on campus, so did instances of prejudices and segregations. And when compared to HBCUs, predominantly white institutions would always use a comparison around the the attrition or the persistence of students, but no one really talked about race at HBCUs because no one believes that racism would occur in an environment where everyone was the same. So that's what I'm trying to go a little bit further and talk about with this research. So with that. Um, the research topic will focus on how within group heterogeneity and interactions contribute to the experiences of black male undergraduate students attending HBCUs. This is to say that students come on campus, they form groups, and then they interact with each other. And then that ultimately really determines the overall racial and ethnic climates of campuses, as I will talk about within the theoretical framework. So from that, there are several questions that come to mind, but the most important question will really allow me to go deeper into a group, and I picked black fraternities because black fraternities have a perception that they are a group on campus where students gain social capital. They have their own sets of policies and procedures and processes their members follow, and oftentimes they, along with some other groups like student athletes, are considered elite individuals on campus as well as leaders. So with that, I just wanted to take a look at that population to really see how they interact with others. In the research question, uh, did I skip something? I'm sorry. The research statement, sorry about that. I'm guiding from another screen to student heterogeneity and group formation as a result of growing demand for higher education attainment is becoming increasingly common. So again, students are forming groups. It is common. According to Moody, within group segregation contributes to the racial and ethnic climates based on four factors. One is propinquity, just really being close in proximity to each other. It says that you will form group formations. Homophily means that you bond with others who are similar to yourselves. Socioeconomic status, oftentimes individuals will group together based on race, gender, and income. And then reciprocity, I talked about the social capital piece, and that's where you'll see that. So the ability to really benefit from being a part of this group is where individuals will, most likely jump into the group. So based on that, I wanted to take a look at a research question that says, how do black males within fraternities, which is defined in the population, at HBCUs, defined in the area, make sense of their interactions with other black male students on campus? So really, how are these students interacting with other black students on campus? That's not to say that there aren't white students or non-black students on campus, but I'm really trying to get at that there are, they're not a monolithic group, and within that group, their interactions may, have implications to the racial and ethnic climate of the campus. So just really looking at how they interact with each other and using the theoretical framework as a guiding place. So there are some sub-questions that came about. Those sub-questions are questions I sent over in a chart. Were you all able to see the chart? And I'll bring them over here. So the sub-questions, pretty much, the interview would start off with these questions about how long have you been a student at Howard University, which is the institution selected, what made you decide to attend Howard University, open up the questions, really just trying to get a background. Tell me about your campus environment. What types of diversity and inclusion programs have you observed? This is really important. As you'll see with the external portion of the theoretical framework, it will discuss those items just to get an idea, but the meat of it will really come in part 2 of the questions, where we're looking at their perceptions. And as you can see here, question 1, what types of diversity and inclusion programs have you observed? Would you describe your institutions and how would you describe your institutions? Numerical representation. So this is really taking a look from the perspective of the student to really understand the environment, which are the internal forces to racial and ethnic climates. As we go on, question 2, students will be asked, or participants will be asked, really, what made you decide to join a fraternity? What were the key experiences, people, characteristics that attracted you to the organization? How have your your interactions with other black males changed since joining the fraternity? So part of the process here is I'm using narrative inquiry, which is really capturing a snapshot or an event in time. And here, that event is really after they joined the fraternity. So, how have things changed after you joined the fraternity? And then the mission of black fraternities is to help develop social and economic power while performing service. How do non-members perceive your organization? So that whole process of how are we interacting, how are they perceiving you all, are there any stereotypes, negative and positive, that you hear? So those are pretty much the questions. I'll talk a little bit more about those as I go through the rest of the slides and really talk about how I derived it. Justification for the studies. One justification is that black males on college campuses must rely on each other for support to really persist to graduation. But however, their small numbers and their differences, their within group assimilations, and their characteristics and interactions may muddle the likelihood that they will form group solidarity. So although they are few in numbers and according to some research they're supposed to be the same, that's not the case. And because of these differences in diversity, they're likely to not really join together and work together and persist to graduation. As a result, institutions of higher education that are found to have negative racial and ethnic related climates typically experience lower academic performance and high levels of attrition amongst African American students. Moving on, the purpose of the study, understanding the perceptions of the interactions with black male students is really critical for creating those new innovative programs and supportive systems to really understand at the university level how to really get these males to come together, what do we do in order to get them to persist. Before we can do that, we really need to understand what their perceptions are. How are they perceiving each other? How is that impacting, or how are those perceptions and stereotypes, impacting behavior in some cases? How do they feel about those things? Not necessarily impact. If I feel like that everyone thinks my fraternity is lazy, I may not most likely I may, stay away from those individuals, which will then, pull away from that solidarity on campus. According to Pike, the production of methods to effectively address and reject oppression experienced by individuals and groups will be generated after understanding how they internalize and reproduce racialization. So right here, this is really important because there are a lot of theories out there that really focuses on internalization. There are some that focus on identification. So this research is looking mostly at internalizing, and that's really how you process things that are said about you, values and cores that you're bringing to the table. So there is a theory out there, and I know we talked last time, Dr. Gorman, social identity theory. And one of the questions was, well, why didn't you, really talk about social identity theory? Why aren't you using that as your framework? Well, social identity theory, I did my research, really refers to social categories of I am. whereas internalization refers to the incorporation of values, attitudes as self-guiding principles. So while one says, I am this, the other one says that, well, my values, my attitudes, and my self-guiding principles really helps me internalize. And when individuals form groups, they're really forming groups based on internalizations more so than identifications. Other research says, which can be pulled in, and we'll talk about this in chapter 2, and I'll talk about social identity theory as well as the black sheep effect, which says that even though you're joining these groups, you're gaining social capitals, you are being judged. Research shows that individuals are being judged. Likable and unlikable activities are more harsh when you're a part of a group. So if you do something within a group and it is favorable to the group, then they'll like it and they'll praise it. If someone else were to do the same thing and they weren't a part of your group, they won't like it and praise it as much. However, the opposite holds true. If you did something that the group found to be just vile and unacceptable, they're going to treat you more harsh than members who are not within the group, according to the black sheep theory. Other theories, 10 toes assimilation theory, which will not be used because this theory really focuses on, okay, individuals get to campus, how do they assimilate, but it drops really there. It doesn't really focus on how they interact with each other. So the theoretical framework that I'm going to introduce really captures all of those things. One other theory, Javelin's theory of assimilation as well. Javelin really focuses on the phases of assimilation, where he focuses on the phase where the anticipatory phase, well, what are you expecting? Then he focuses on the encounter phase, well, what did you encounter? And then he focuses on the phase after that, well, what did you do after you encountered it, and how are you processing those things? That is great, but it really still doesn't really get on the piece of the interactions between groups on campuses. So while all of those are great theories, they will be discussed in Chapter 2. However, they will not guide this study. So I just wanted to let you all know why. What else is out there that I'm saying that will be included as Chapter 2 is further augmented, but those will not guide this study. Great research. I have nothing against any of those scholars. It just doesn't fit this study. Positionality. Well, what are my biases? Well, I need to really accept those biases in this research, and I cannot separate my position from this study. So I'm a black male who attended a non-HBCU. I went to a predominantly white institution. I witnessed disparities on hand, from students who are in particular groups. So I witnessed student athletes getting better treatment. I witnessed individuals and fraternities getting somewhat better treatment. And in addition to that, I am a member of a historically black fraternity. And I also, just like some of those other scholars, and this is probably sound crazy, but I believe that believing in monolithic stereotypes about HBCU environments. On campus at a predominantly white institution, I experienced racism and segregation firsthand. And when I would think about my black colleagues or fellow black males on other campuses, I would think, well, this possibly couldn't be the same experience at a HBCU where everyone is the same. So I guess you can call it ignorance, but I also believe that those environments were monolithic and everyone got along on campus. The groups didn't matter. Everyone talked to each other. There wasn't segregation. I even saw the movie School Days, where it talks about colorism and segregation on campus. However, in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's just a movie. That can't be the situation at a historically black college or university. So coming to the table, I'm the first to admit that I had biases around this. So I'm also interested in it because I'm learning something in the process myself. It shows that I'm evolving. I'm not afraid to admit that, yes, I held these perceptions. Do they seem ignorant at the forefront? Perhaps to someone, but for me, this is just who I am and how I feel about the study. So moving forward, Hurtado has a theoretical framework, a racial climate model. It posits that college enrollees are instructed in visible racial settings, which are impacted by two elements: internal, where there are group perceptions, attitudes, intergroup relations, and institutional diversity, and then external forces, so government policies, programs, social issues. And I believe that this study will capture a lot because this study, at the core, really focuses on really understanding that students are in racial environments, and racial ethnic climates really aren't observed. So it's really a broad overview, but this really just sets out the framework. Whereas, the external forces, government policies, programs, and issues are important. I believe those are non-controllable. We can't really take, the perceptions of students. I guess we can, but they really don't have control over that. The second part of the framework is the perceptions and attitudes between and amongst group members. That is what I'm trying to hone in on. So, what are the perceptions and attitudes about the group? What are the perceptions and attitudes about the group? And then the fourth component of the internal forces is the behavioral climate, where it talks solely about intergroup relations on campus. So I'm looking at really what are the perceptions between members of on campus, what are those stereotypes, and then the behavioral climate. How is that impacting interactions? Are you all interacting with each other? Do these perceptions make you want to interact more, or do they make you want to interact less? Do you find yourself, isolated, or do you have the perception that you're isolated from individuals? And then really just taking a look at the institution with those first questions, although it's a part of the framework, really not the focus of it. So I do have questions in there about, what are you observing on campus, as your institution's representation. So those leading questions, what have you observed on campus? Is there diversity on campus? Tell me about the climate of your campus. What have you observed? And then really go into the other questions. Well, how are you perceived? How are members in your fraternity perceived? How do you interact with others who aren't in your fraternities? What are the stereotypes that you hear? How do you perceive yourself? How do you perceive your organization? So really looking at the lived experiences of those individuals and really telling it in the terms of a story. So that's why narrative inquiry is going to be important, because I really want to hear it from them about their experiences and try my best to really just convey that message, back as I heard it using another framework. So that's why this framework was selected, because it really gives a glimpse into racial ethnic climates, unlike the other models, which really just talk about environments, assimilation, and identification. So, research methodology will be narrative inquiry. Narrative inquiry, again, it's based on storytelling, co-structuring, and co-storytelling, which I think will be really important, because as I'm going through and I'm talking to the interviewees, I really hear their stories and really just have an understanding of what they're trying to convey from their perception. So I'm looking at several things with this. The methodology is narrative inquiry. I'll do semi-structured interviews, which means that the interviews will have really little ambiguity. The questions will be the same across interviews. This is to ensure that I meet triangulation, which is hard to do in qualitative research. However, the validity of the study will be covered because does it accurately describes the phenomena in question? Yes, because Hurtado's model will allow my questions to cross-reference. So I'm meeting validity there. Authenticity, that really just says, is the research really reflective of the individual population and their experiences? Yes, because they'll get a chance to go back and read what I wrote up, and if it really accurately captures what they were trying to convey in that time. So the other piece is reliability. Is the study reliable? Perhaps. Usually you'll see that with quantitative research. Reliability says, can this study be repeated? This one probably not, because it's qualitative and environments and people are different all over the place. So I don't really see that. However, I do believe that I will reach saturation, given that this population is within the same market or environment. Saturation is basically when you start hearing the same thing over and over and you know that things are true. Saturation really helps to sustain the validity of the study, which says that is this accurately describing the phenomena on campus. From there, I'm able to extract things, write those things up, and then report those items out. So in order to do that, I do have a framework that I'm going to use, and it's in Chapter 3. It's McCormick's framework for analysis of information. So basically, data collected will be using the multiple lens framework. We're just going to look at language. The language component focuses on what's being told, how it's being told, who's telling it, and the relationship between myself and the participants. This can be influenced based on the location of the interaction. So, if we won't be, but if we're inside of my home, which won't be the case, then this probably would be a lot different if they were on their own environment or if there were other individuals around, things of that sort. So just have to be mindful of the environment and the language that they're telling and make sure I capture that. The narrative process really just emphasizes the words, but not the structure of the words, not the words themselves. So if they're stuttering or they're disjointed, it may have a different meaning for something that is free flowing. So if I ask them a question and they hesitate, like, perhaps something else is on their mind, and that means I may need to, probe if need be away from the question. So that's what the narrative process contains. The context piece is a little different than the narrative piece as well as the other piece. The language component, the context really implies that when an individual can recall events without having to find key terms and language to the researchers, the information is more likely to be enhanced and require less analysis. So basically, what does that mean? That means that when these questions, key terms in language, if they don't have to ask, well, what are you meaning? What does that mean? If everything makes sense to them. So that's where Dr. Patterson and I were talking about. Will these questions be interpreted for yourself? Do they have to really go back and ask you, can you clarify that? So these questions should be written in such a way that they are comprehensible to the participant to make sure that they understand, so that I don't have to go back, even with their responses, and say, what did you mean? So that's two parts. I need to make sure that they understand the question, and I need to make sure that I understand their answers, that they're able to just, have the questions free flow. A lot of times, culture can, change these questions. Whereas, me being a member of a fraternity, they may say something about a process, and I may say, oh, okay, I understand what you're talking about. And that may also enhance the dialogue and require less analysis for myself because we have a shared common language. So if they can resonate with me and see that we share similar cultures, they're more likely to introduce some of those contextual languages uh, into the conversation. So then the final lens of it is the moment, and that's really when after I scan the data, I discover new content from it and new understanding to the data. So if things emerge, and I take a look at the information again, and I say, oh, I get it. That makes sense. I didn't understand it at first, but perhaps I see different meaning out of something. So that's in the moment, the discovery phase. Those are those aha moments from the researcher. Hopefully, I will see some of those, which would just tell me that this was a good study and that it made sense to conduct the research, and that I found something new that perhaps I wasn't even seeking to learn in the first phase. Um, After which, of course, this information will be coded. After coding the research, I'll convey it into a storytelling format through the framework, keeping the framework in mind, and through the lenses of McCormick, and then I'll present the findings to you all, and hopefully we'll have a great time when those findings are presented. The audience for this. So when determining an audience for this research, I have to ask myself, and I keep going back and forth with this, who can benefit from this research? Of course, I'm thinking higher ed administrators at HBCUs, decision makers can benefit from reading this. Student affairs staff, since group solidarity produces, the likelihood that students will finish, perhaps they're interested in that information, as well as recruitment staff. Maybe recruitment staff, is also interested in this. So as I go through, I'm constantly thinking of other stakeholders. And, my mind, I'll be honest with you, I was driving in the car and I was thinking maybe a sociologist, who's interested in, group formation, or groups will be interested in some research like this, or, uh, maybe a teacher on a campus will be interested just to see if they're noticing any of these behaviors, in classroom. If they see that these students aren't talking to these students and they have on these fraternity hoods or sweaters, maybe there's something they can do to help increase the solidarity. So as I begin to, go through the study, I'm constantly being mindful of who can benefit from this research, and not only just who can benefit, but how they can benefit from the research. So that's pretty much all I have.
Much. Thank you very much. Um, I think we'll entertain or start entertaining any questions. I was kind of looking at some of your information that you provided, which I appreciate that you gave us a really in-depth understanding from you're better than what your slides gave just a snippet, and again, you were able to articulate, each piece of that, which I'm really happy to hear, and also understand that you have an understanding of it as you try to, display it. I was looking at the model itself, and I was looking back at your chapter 3, and so far I'm trying to conceptualize everything and making sure that I'm clear on the different levels because I know it's internal and external kind of perspective. Um, and when you state that, you talk about the external forces impacting campus within the theoretical framework. And you talked about the government policies, programs, initiatives. Um, I don't know if that's something that would need to be clearly addressed. I know that you give good examples in this chapter. I guess just making sure that that's also covered and also collected as it relates to how the study may unfold. When I say that, historically, at Howard, you and just based on my own experience and knowledge, that's a very unique institution because you have an opportunity to find out, or for especially for this population, where many of these organizations were founded. So that actually may have a little bit of bias, a little bit of different kind of energy. And I don't know if that's an internal or external kind of factor that may influence that. And I don't know if you had thought about that in that lens or not, but um, I know that maybe not as many fraternities, but definitely the sororities, or the whole historically black Greek system has a lot of, I guess, historical presence on that campus. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
I don't. I don't want to make that. I want to make that point initially because I think it's an important point to consider. Because as you dive deeper into the questions or get deeper into those interviews, naturally, if I'm at as what we call the alpha chapter, where this institution was founded or where the lineage of this organization was created, naturally there might be some different type of bias how students do perceive one another. Does that make sense? And again, I don't
Absolutely.
know if that's going to be different than some other institution. So I'll just throw that out there for argument's sake. But other than that, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Margaret, and then I'll probably have a couple more kind of comments. But well done with your presentation, and I'll stop there.
I think, Brian, I'm right where you're at. Dimar, I'm trying to like go back and forth between your theoretical framework and your chapter 2. And so if I understand it, your theoretical framework is on page
12.
12, Hurtado's. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So one quick thought that I had is just in a subsection like this, like just be real basic. Like the primary theoretical lens guiding this dissertation is Hurtado. End of story, and give the model, both in this as well as in your presentation. I was thrown off when you were bringing up Pike, and I'm like, what's Pike? Why is Pike in here? And this Pike 2010,
Okay.
and then I was multitasking just like Brian, and I was going into your document, and I'm like, I don't even see Pike 2010 in your reference list. So I was thrown off during it. So I think when you come to your final presentation, it's just present Hurtado in the picture and be done. And then after you present it, you can have a little bit of a discussion about others that you considered or whatever.
Right. Right.
That's looking forward. Having said that, given that it is your model, and given you were talking about external and internal, I don't mean to throw you off, but you're doing a case study. And I think you still are going to do the exact same thing. You're still going to interview people. You can even still use McCormick. But because that theoretical framework is grounded in this idea of you've got to understand the context, and you talked a lot about the context. I think the first part of what you need to do for your study is set that stage. What does historically black college mean? What's Howard? What's the context? What's the institutional context, the policy, fraternity life? That's a big part of your story. And then the question from your participants. So your interview questions still say, we're just calling it, we're just putting a different wrapping around the outside of it. And you actually still have in your proposal on page 36 a paragraph about case study.
Yeah.
So case study, you still do qualitative interviewing. You still capture people's stories and perceptions. You still weave their stories. You still, you know, hold on, I got to get rid of my cat. It doesn't change at all. I mean, even what you submit into IRB, then you just use the word case study.
Okay.
Kate doesn't care what you write on top of that.
Okay.
And you don't need to change this now before submitting your stuff to IRB. It's just going forward with your manuscript. That I think that really needs to be aligned. Is you're doing a case. It's called a descriptive case study using qualitative interviewing, semi-structured questions with, and I didn't read anywhere how many people you're going to plan to interview. I know there are 9 fraternities.
Yeah, so 8 to 15 was the pool. I'm aiming for 15.
Right, 8 to 15, that all stays the same.
Yep.
It just, to do the case study, I think the important front end work that you can do while Kate's reviewing your stuff is, and you know some of this already, it's just reviewing documents. So the first phase of your data collection and data analysis is document reviews, because you want to go back to this picture on page 12, and you want to fill in that. So what's the social historical context for your study?
Yeah.
You know, so what does our landscape look like now in 2016, 2017? You know, what's the policy context right now? Institutional context, so that's Howard as the historically black, and if you're going to keep them anonymous, it's, you know, a historically black college located in a urban setting.
Yeah.
You know, that's been around for, you know, 102 years. The climate for diversity, from what you understand, so that one will be a mixture of what you understand from the documents and then what you hear from your participants.
Right.
I think that's the real intriguing one of this, because you're going to be asking them questions about, you know, why did they choose Howard, why they here, how have they found their experience, etc. And then you also have the climate within their fraternity.
Right. So it's another level deeper.
Right, right. You know, and whether you, like in this diagram, because eventually in chapter 5, what you do is you represent this model, but you pull out the theory and you insert your findings from your data analysis.
Okay, that's doable. I mean, and it should be easy because I'm down the street from Howard and I'm always on campus, so that helps.
Right. Well, and the document review, you can do it all. Only want to use public documents. So you look at their website. You know, all the stuff that you have is accessible stuff. And you can even do the document reviews along the way or at the end or whatever. But I think this external is really important for your study.
Okay.
And then I don't know about this co-curricular. I don't know that you're going to get the part of his model that has the 2 circles, the processes, and the co-curricular pedagogy practice programming. Mm-hmm. You're not really, I think for you, that slice of this multi-layered cake is fraternity life. Where I think, and I don't know Hurtado's work, I don't know this work, but... Mm-hmm. see this has got this whole thing about instructor and student and self-identity.
Right.
You're not really looking at classroom interaction. You're gathering their stories about their fraternity life and the extent to which their
Right.
fraternity life is enhancing their sense of social capital, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea, the habits of the mind and skills, lifelong learning,
Right.
that's still a part of how they understand themselves because self-confidence, self-image, self-efficacy impacts how we learn. And then maybe community context, maybe the community context is really the fraternity, I don't know. Or maybe that's like around Howard, like, that urban setting. Maybe
Yeah,
that.
how are they perceived by, members
Yeah,
of
so maybe that's where that stuff, comes into play, like where it's located,
hmm
what's surrounding that part of Northeast DC, the border of Maryland, just kind of some unique dynamics associated with that.
And a lot of that will probably overlap with the institutional context of how, they are on campus. A lot of that will probably overflow to, their perceptions in the community, since a lot of the work they do is both on and off campus.
Right, and so
And so I have people on the line. They don't know what we're talking about, so I just want to pull this in for them.
yeah, and that may be in the end when what you find, you may modify this Hurtado model and make every arrow a double head arrow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it looks like on the right or left side is the arrows going down, and the right side is the arrows going up. So it looks like the model's intended to be interactive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't think it's that big of a case study.
So I don't think it'll be much change. I just have to go back and in the background, just add those subheaders and talk about the socio-political and institutional, those.
Right. Does that make sense for you based on this model? Because I think that I mean, Margaret, you hit it on the head. Because I mean, I went through that. And I was looking at the model again. I'm like, well, I don't see that individual kind of piece, but I mean, it's filtered through all of these contexts. That historical context, the political context. So I think that it's a good model. And it's a good fit, and recreating pieces of this that align with where I think you really want to go with your study, because all of that background piece is also just as important as what you'll get in those interviews, I think, or to some degree it sets the foundation.
Your first question under part 2 is around how would you describe your institutional numeric representation of race? So you're asking the institutional questions anyways.
Yeah. So what happens is this framework is weird. It has the if you look at it, and I don't have my screen up. The government policies, programs, and larger popular events make up the external forces, and then the internal forces has some overlap where it talks about the institution, the perceptions, and behavior on campus. So it's broken into two, and there is some overlap with the institutional historical record and the perceptions of the campus, and perhaps the government policies, programs that may impact those things. So there is some overlap. I guess the way I approached it was if I focused on the institutional, the internal things, those are things that are, probably every day on campus that's impacted, so the institution historical record and inclusion of inclusion. So that's something that's happening on campus that, they're doing. And, the like student organizations, the number of organizations, those are things that are probably more controlled at the school level, whereas those government issues or social events like a Trayvon Martin really aren't.
I don't think you. I think you want to keep yourself open.
Okay.
Because maybe they are.
Okay, and to give the totality of the story, and that's perfectly fine.
And
So
see, I would use that. I think you could add a few more questions around. And again, if you use your theoretical model, like, is there anything going on more globally today in terms of where we are in the U.S. and different events that you think is shaping your experience here at Howard in your fraternity? And if they go no, it's no. But if they bring on up Trayvon Martin or whatever, the police brutality, the election year, I mean, the atmosphere right now, because we are in an election year and race has been a center of this, that's part of your story. And I think part of when you report out, it is going to be important that you collected your data during an election year in which race played a role, and in which there was culminating events that have now made race relations really at the forefront. This study may be very different in 2 or 3 years from now.
Yes.
So I think, again, that's why case study is really neat for you. And I think, again, I would just encourage you to take your model, look at each of those levels, and you ask a semi-structured question. Is there anything about, currently what's, the economic, social, political conditions in terms of how you're understanding your experience here at Howard in your fraternity? Always bring it back to that.
Yeah.
And is there anything else? Like, ask the global, but bring them back locally, because it's about how their experience is in fraternity, their decision and their relationships within their fraternity as they understand themselves as a black student at Howard.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. So that would change the focus of the study to be less around just the sole interactions, but more so how they.
No, your phenomenon is the social interaction, but it's how, have any of the current social political events that are going on impacted your social interactions in your fraternity? And the answer is like, no, right. Then okay, move on.
Okay, perfect. So just adding a question, like you said, for each of those other layers and just building those layers out with context.
Yeah, but keep bringing it back to your core phenomenon is about their social interactions.
Okay. So really, like you said, feeding chapter.
Keep rooting every question back to that. Like, what about the different offerings that Howard has in terms of other diversity and inclusion programs? Do you take advantage of those? If so, what ones? And how do those impact your social interactions? Always keep bringing it back to their social interactions.
Okay.
Because you're not describing the whole world, you're describing their social interactions. So where's your... Go back to your research question. Let's just take a look at that. On that.
Yeah, I was going to say if that made any changes to that.
I think it will. So it will just say, how do black males within fraternities, HBCUs, make sure their social interactions are on campus instead of interactions with others, or should we keep that with the solidarity?
How do black males within fraternities at historically black colleges make sense of their interactions with other black male students? It's still the same.
Okay.
You're just going to ask any of the current events impacting how you're making sense of your interactions with other black male students on campus. Is your anything that the university, Howard University, is doing, and these other inclusion, diversity and inclusion programs, are they shaping how you're making sense of your interaction with other black male students? You keep coming back to that core part of your research question. It's just you're asking it in different ways because you're trying to find out, are any of these factors having a more or less significance on how they're making sense of these interactions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that stays the same.
Yeah.
The sub-questions that you talked about, I think those are more your interview questions and not necessarily research questions. I think with case study, you just need one question.
Okay, and this is the question.
And this is the question. To that end, though, you have black males written twice. Do you need that written twice in your question? Do you only care about how black males interact with other black males?
Uh, yes, but and the reason behind that was with the whole piece of being monolithic, and that they must form solidarity in order to persevere. So that research piece there is what caused me to put that in there.
Okay, so
But
let's. Okay.
I could take that out and then do a sub question on other males on campus, and then are these males typically black or non-black? I could throw in sub questions after that.
But Howard's co-ed.
It is, but this piece is focused on just the black male population, on how they're interacting with each other.
Because the purpose of your study is to understand the extent to which the stereotype of the black male community being monolithic, or is it more of a mosaic?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So let's go to, where's your purpose statement?
Mm, right here.
So
Yeah, again, for me, it seems like a simpler purpose statement. Like the purpose of this doctoral thesis research is to uncover how black males at historically black colleges make sense. You kind of use your research question as your purpose statement, and then you have a second sentence specifically. The study seeks to understand the extent to which these black male communities are monolithic or more of a mosaic.
right. You want to share that one more time? Because I follow where you were going, and I think that
Yeah, so the purpose is on page 4. So when I was putting the PowerPoint together, I was putting it together based on like the research course we had, like part 2. But here's the actual purpose statement.
See, I think this could be one of your significance. I think if you understand more, you might be able to come up with innovative programs. I don't know about the second one. You might have greater insight about that. But when I've heard you talk, when you started out, your whole thing was about this assumption that black male communities are monolithic, and you
Yeah.
don't believe that. So that's your purpose. So the purpose of this dissertation research and how black male college students at historically black colleges are making sense of their interactions with other black males. And then second sentence, which is you want to embed your research question essentially in your purpose statement. I think you're making it more complicated than you need to.
So
And,
here's
and
the purpose statement in the document.
yeah, and I think specifically to understand the extent to which these black male communities are monolithic or more mosaic. And I think you have an assumption that they're more of a mosaic. They're not as monolithic.
Um, I guess my bias. Well, no, I think I was on the other end in my positionality, monolithic. But I mean,
Right, but you were saying with your stories that you had with your other colleagues, their experiences are different. So maybe you don't maybe you don't know. But your position
I don't know. So I guess I come from the stance that they were, because I went to a predominantly white institution, and I
right.
will always say, well, they aren't dealing with the same things that we're dealing with here. So I guess I'm biased on the monolithic side, but I mean, I'm sure, I don't know is how I guess I'm leaning monolithic, and maybe the research will show something else.
Okay. Okay. Well, and you don't need to claim because it's to the extent to which they do embrace the dominant model that these are monolithic. And you can find that, and you may not. And it
Okay.
doesn't. That's why it's more of a secondary kind of area of curiosity. And I think your outcomes are going to be, if you understand more about these perceptions, you might then be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your second bullet point on this slide, for me, I feel like you're overcomplicating your study. I think it's great in chapter 2. You explore all the different work around, racism and social, identity theory, Tinto. Chapter 2 is kind of your chance to talk about all the different strands of literature that surround your study. And
Yes.
they may or may not come into play. But I
Right.
think going into this, you want to keep things really simple for yourself.
Okay.
That's what just is my suggestion.
Well, let me ask a question or just a thought process. Are we losing the focus on the black males in the Greek fraternities? Was that will be the I know that that's your research question. So with this purpose statement, should that also be identified within that kind of context? Um,
Yeah, so the purpose of this doctoral dissertation research is to understand how black males enrolled in a fraternity at historically black colleges make sense of their interaction with other black males. So yeah, I mean, insert that. Yeah. That's why you want to make sure your research question, go back to your research question. Do you have fraternity in your research question?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. That's what I say. Whatever is in your research question, you embed that in so that there's consistency. Yeah,
yeah, I just want to make sure that we capture
yeah.
that so we don't
Yeah.
lose focus of that. And then again,
And then,
because you
like
now
you said, looping every question back to that make sense of their interactions.
This
absolutely.
this is like you're in an ocean. This is your life preserver, your research question, and your purpose statement. So you want to make it like really solid, and you just keep coming back to it.
Okay.
So your interview questions, you will ask about different factors as it relates to them making sense of their interactions. You just keep coming back to this.
Absolutely.
But no, I think, Dimir, I think you're in a great place. Like I said, this nuance of, so we call it case study instead of narrative, it's really no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and because you're interviewing 8 to 15 males, you're using Howard. I think you'll add in this additional dimension of setting the context, which you need because that's what you're doing. So you're gonna have to do the legwork on that, but you know a lot, you know some stuff already.
yeah. So I have a question. With setting the context, should I put that around chapter 1 with the framework and then break it down to the research site, or should I move it? I think that will go in number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, something you and Brian can deal with. People often rewrite your whole chapter 1,
Yeah.
and I often tell my students, put this whole, because the thing is, you don't even turn in your proposal to IRB.
Right.
So you may want to write chapter 1 at the end after you're done and you found what you've had. And it's just, for me, chapter 1 is more of like a journalistic style of, here's the deal. This dissertation occurred in a really interesting time and space. And, it looked at,
Excuse me.
for black males' college experiences, those who were enrolled in fraternity, and how they make sense of their interactions at a historically black college. And it took place during a period of time when race relations in the United States were really becoming a forefront of our news. I mean, over the last 2 years plus, that's been a forefront. It was probably heightened because it was also an election year. And so you went in and gathered data from a dozen of these students around how are they experiencing this, understanding that the context is important, which is why you use this theoretical model. So it'll be a nice, smooth newspaper style. Chapter 1 I like is more of a newspaper style, and you're real succinct. And so the primary theoretical framework was Hurtado. Here's the model. Here's the main research question. Here's a quick overview of what you did. And your whole document becomes past tense when you go back to rewrite it.
Yeah.
Correct.
At this point, it's all future. When you rewrite your manuscript, it's all past. So again, it's up to you and Brian, but I often tell my students, why don't we set this aside for now? and and come back and rewrite chapter one when you've got a clear picture of how all of this fits together.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, I got to pop. Apologize for being late. Congratulations. I'm
Oh,
good with this, Brian. I'm good with this going forward to IRB or
Okay.
whatever you think is, next. Um, oh, the only other thing, your research questions, did you test those out yet? They sound pretty technical.
so they haven't been tested, Doctor. So Brian and I, we were Dr. Patterson. We were just talking about that prior to you coming on call. So we're going to actually do a pilot of them first before we roll them out to the participants.
Yeah, and you can go ahead and give what you have indicate, and then while you're waiting for her, you can test this out. And I think what you're going to find is you're going to have to write in terms that a college student will know.
Absolutely.
You know what you're going after, but now you just got to translate it into really basic. I'm thinking about my stepkids. I don't know that they would be able to, some of the terms in there, they'd be like, what? What do you? So
Yeah.
think simple for them.
Okay.
Maybe they will. But all
All
right.
right.
All right.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, good job. I think you came along great, and just where you're at and your ability to articulate that was really clear to me.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Patterson.
Well, I guess she's shared
Listen,
her view, and I
I
guess
took a
if I
lot of notes over here, but I'm
yeah.
I'm I'm comfortable with changing it up, and using that model will really help because just taking those subheadings and fitting it in, so should be an easy fix.
Good, good, good. I'm glad you feel that way. I feel pretty confident about that also. And again, that was the biggest piece that I saw was looking at the model. I know we had gone back and forth from three different models to now
Yeah,
where we are now, but hopefully that makes sense as far as just looking at the model, making it simple. Actually, what I would even suggest, not saying that you have to do it in a formal way, but just rewriting the model in a way that you interpret it. And that was the best advice my faculty member gave me, that I was able to redesign how that model worked for me as I now conducted that type of research. Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yeah, so
Um,
generating my own framework.
yeah, yeah, just based off of that model. And I mean, you reference it, but I mean, that'll help you kind of work through any questions that you have as far as the figuring out how to ask the questions and is it looping back. And that's why I mentioned that external piece of that, because I thought that if as now as you understand, that's a major piece of that.
Yeah, it's half the model, right?
Yeah, yeah, well, it's huge, it's huge, and that was the part that I wanted to really emphasize, not to stop your thought process, because I think the model is strong. I just want to make sure that you see that piece of the model as one of the foundations. And again, Dr. Margaret made a good mention to look at it from a more of a case study approach, and hopefully that makes sense to you, because you'll still do that narrative approach and getting those descriptive context for those folks that you're interviewing. But
Yeah, I
again,
think it'll add to the study as well because
oh yeah,
then
absolutely,
like we talked about before, I can introduce those institutional cues and the environmental perceptions, whereas before, so this will just bring everything full circle.
absolutely. And I think honestly, this will be something that you'll be happy that you took it from this perspective, that you can then, as as you look at this for the future, to replicate this. As we talked about before, why can't I run this study at a Morgan State or run the same study at a Johnson C. Smith or another institution? Because everything, as you look at it, if the model is solid, then you can go back and replicate that just like that. I'm not saying that you have to do it today, but I'm just saying for future tense. And again, you now become an expert in that field. That's what we intentionally want long term our goals to look like. So hopefully that makes sense to you. We can also circle back around, with the next phases again, but I do want you to take some time, today just to enjoy the fact that, hey, this is one big step that um, you were successful in completing. So again, as I mentioned to you before, I wouldn't advise you or bring you to this point if I didn't feel that you were confident in the fact that you had the pieces and the elements there that you needed to have there to be successful. So Congratulate yourself on this phase of the game, as they say, and take some pride in that you got here. So the next phase is just to fine tune it and tweak it.